It was the Aussies' longest and bloodiest battle of the Vietnam War. For the first time, Australian troops would be subjected to mass waves of attacks from North Vietnamese regulars, be engaged in fierce hand-to-hand combat, and were very nearly overrun. It's a tale of determination, bravery, and sacrifice on both sides, and for the diggers, survival against overwhelming odds. This is the Battle of Coral Balmoral. Outside of Australia, and perhaps even within Australia itself, Coral Balmoral isn't so well known. Much recognition is given to the Battle of Long Tan, but did you know that 5% of Australia's total losses in the Vietnam War occurred within 26 days from the start of Coral Balmoral on the 12th of May 1968. This was nearly a month of brutal fighting on both sides. To understand the battle, we first have to find out why it was brought about. In the wake of the Tet Offensive beginning in January 1968, the Australian task force operating in Phuoc Toi province was increased to 3 infantry battalions and beefed up with the armour of Centurion tanks. In the late spring of 1968, the North Vietnamese plotted to plan a Phase 2 of the Tet Offensive, known as Mini-Tet, against South Vietnam. A large part of this offensive was to be centred on Saigon, part of a wider communist strategy to take the war to the cities and improve the North Vietnamese position at the peace talks in Paris, which were due to commence. This specific offensive would be made from the direction of the north of Saigon. The communists planned to run large numbers of men and munitions south and congregate north of Saigon. The area north of Bien Hoa was known to the Americans as AO Surfers and was a known staging area for North Vietnamese army units and formations that had moved down the many parallel infiltration routes known collectively as the Ho Chi Minh Trail. In May 1968, control of this area would prove vital for Saigon's immediate security. This flow of troops and equipment had to be interrupted. On the 10th of May 1968, the United States requested the Australians to deploy 2 battalions to AO Surfers to assist in this defence of Saigon. A failed insurgent attack in the capital had led to reports of enemy units withdrawing to AO Surfers to regroup and reinforce. Up until that point, other than the SAS and the AATTV, no Australian ground forces had operated further north than Saigon. Their task was to establish a series of fire support patrol bases from which to disrupt and interdict enemy forces concentrating and transiting through the area, which could again threaten Saigon or the large US air base at Bien Hoa. In Vietnam, fire support bases were meant to provide artillery support to infantry in remote areas away from the main bases. With the artillery covering them, the infantry task was to go out on patrols to cut off enemy infiltration routes. Many bases were only designed to be around a short time, such as a few days or weeks. However, others did become permanent bases. They usually consisted of around 6 artillery pieces, such as howitzers, a unit of engineers to construct and maintain the base, an aid post, landing pads, a HQ and communications element, and 1 or 2 companies of infantry to serve as a defensive garrison. These FSBs were also vulnerable. Stuck out in the boonies away from the main base, they would many times provide tempting targets for the enemy, and sometimes they would be deliberately used as bait by commanders. It could be compared to a hunter tethering a goat to the ground to draw in a tiger. A risky business for all involved. Just a small doctrinal point, although it is significant. The Australians termed fire support bases as fire support patrol bases, slightly different to the Americans. The term FSB, or fire support base, was based on the established US Army practice of dominating the local area by overwhelming firepower alone. The Australians incorporated vigorous and extensive patrolling, coupled with firepower to dominate a local area, hence the term FSPB, Fire Support Patrol Base. Within AO Surfers, 3 FSPBs were to be established inside smaller AOs, Bondi, Manly and Newport. Going with the surf theme, it looks like the Aussies named these after beaches. Rather than great whites and poisonous jellyfish, however, these beaches would soon be overrun with an even deadlier foe. When planning the move, intelligence given to the Australian leadership was vague and unspecific. Although being told that there was enemy activity, there was little in the way of granular level detail. Useful intelligence summaries gathered on the ground by US forces, including details of 3 enemy regiments or formations operating in the area, had, somewhere in the chain of reporting, not been effectively disseminated to the Aussies at battalion level. The Australians were also unable to conduct more detailed reconnaissance or effective intelligence preparation of the battle space prior to deploying to the area, due to fear of enemy activity. A helicopter pilot taking 1 and 3 RAR senior officers over the battle space prior to deployment refused to fly below 1,500 metres for fear of ground fire. This left the officers unable to effectively assess the terrain. This intelligence gap, along with others, was to have severe consequences. The first fire base to be established was Coral, inside AO Bondi. This was about 7 kilometres north of Tamuin, a village about 40 kilometres north of Saigon. 1 RAR's advance party were met by American troops providing initial protection for the landing zone at surface for the Australians. The American soldiers, glad to be relieved, warned the diggers, "You won't have to go looking for Charlie here. He'll come looking for you." That sounds like a pretty ominous handover. On the 12th of May 1968, the operation to occupy Coral by troops of 1 RAR, along with 102 Field Battery RAA, 161 Battery RNZA, began. To compound problems, other American forces, heavily engaged elsewhere, led to helicopter transport and support being delayed for the Australian airlift. Therefore, the Australians arrived at the Coral landing zone behind schedule. Rather than everyone arriving on site by midday, all units did not arrive until 1600 hours. The airlift was also disorganised, with units not landing in designated areas. Some pilots were unable to land on the planned landing zones due to the vegetation and had to drop off troops and equipment at slightly different locations. This could have been avoided or mitigated had those senior officers conducting the recce in the helicopter been able to get to a lower altitude and conduct a more granular or more detailed assessment of the terrain. Much of the surrounding environment, rather than flat grassland, which many had anticipated, was instead waist-high scrub. The 161 Kiwi battery also mistakenly ended up 1,500 metres to the southwest of Coral. The artillery also reportedly arrived before the infantry, who were meant to secure the site and take it over from the Americans. It all added to confusion. However, this was likely caused by the helicopter logistical problems, so aircraft may have been arriving haphazardly. That's my guess anyway. But all in all, it does, in British parlance, seem like a bit of a cock-up. As the familiar saying goes, no plan survives first contact. Being soldiers, the Aussies would adapt and overcome. With all the delays, by nightfall, reportedly, no barbed wire or claymores had been laid. The mortar platoon, one of the last to arrive, had even less time to dig in. The gunners of 102 Battery were unable to carry out the normal defensive tasks, such as the erection of barbed wire, since neither the defence stores nor the battery bulldozer had arrived as scheduled. With stand to called at dusk, the garrison focused on the outward threat, leaving any more construction work until the next day. With Coral still unfinished, 1 RAR forward deployed 3 companies on ambush duty. Delta Company, 1 kilometre to the north, Alpha, 1 kilometre to the northeast, Bravo, slightly further south, and Charlie was left to cover the road leading into the area. Units from 3 RAR were deployed to the west. Of concern was the 1 RAR mortar platoon, which was left exposed near a rubber plantation without infantry protection. The thick vegetation of the rubber plantation would be ideal for any enemy wishing to sneak up close to the Australian position. The 7th NVA Division, operating in the area, had been observing the Australians all day, and sensed Coral was highly vulnerable. The North Vietnamese were experts in night attacks. Taking advantage of a tropical downpour after dark, they began their assault on the firebase. The attack consisted of at least one battalion of the 141 NVA regiment and two specialist infiltration groups of Viet Cong. Perhaps around 1,500 to 2,000 troops, maybe more. Two small sporadic contacts with D Company occurred in the early evening hours as the enemy probed and deployed into position. Then things quietened down. The calm before the storm. The main assault commenced when D Company detected a large enemy force passing through their position at around 0200 hours and opened fire. The enemy responded with RPG fire, resulting in 2 KIA and 11 wounded for D Company. 102 Battery provided artillery support, and after 20 minutes the contact was over. At 0230 hours, the enemy made a further concentrated attack towards Coral, passing between Alpha and Bravo Company's position. Using mortar and RPG fire on the Australians to keep their heads down, the enemy crept to within a few metres of the perimeter, and then launched a sudden attack in huge numbers on the outer machine gun positions and the vulnerable mortar platoon. One artilleryman with the M60 machine gun emplacement stated, "The VC got up from all around us. They crawled up to within 4 feet of the M60, and we didn't even know they were there." 4 feet. They were holding their AK-47s up in the air, spraying bullets. There was yelling coming from the mortar section. We could hear one of the mortar crew yelling that they were coming in and not to fire. Then we heard 2 Australian voices screaming, "They've got us!" But because of the number of VC between us and the mortars, we could not help them. Managing to overrun part of Coral, desperate hand-to-hand fighting occurred. The NVA hurled grenades at the diggers, as well as firing a hail of bullets at pretty much point-blank range. The gunners were initially hamstrung by not being issued grenades and were unable to respond in kind. The enemy managed to capture number 6 gun. Luckily, the gun sergeant had the foresight to take the firing pin from the gun, leaving it disabled. A modern version of spiking the guns. As the desperate fighting was ongoing at the guns, an enemy assault from the north occurred. This attack, aimed at the mortar crew, was estimated at 400 strong, against a single understrength platoon of just 18 men. That's odds of over 20 to 1. Arriving one of the last at around 1600 hours, the mortar platoon had had very little time to prepare any proper defensive positions other than shallow shell scrapes. The enemy must have known that this position was the Achilles heel of Coral. In the fighting, the NVA even managed to seize an Australian mortar, firing 3 rounds at the Aussies before the operators were shot down. Desperate, the mortar platoon took the ultimate decision and cooled down defensive fire on their own position to prevent being overrun. I believe the term would be a broken arrow in the US military for this dire position needing artillery or air support if your position's being overrun. I'm pretty sure it is, but feel free to correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. Back at the mortar platoon, the 2IC screamed to his men, "Stay down! Splintex coming in!" Devastating anti-personnel Splintex rounds were fired over open sights into the raves of NVA attackers. These were the modern equivalent of canister rounds of the Napoleonic era. Each Splintex round contained 7,200 flechettes, fin-stabilised projectiles similar to small arrows. Just to give you an indication of the level of intensity of fighting during that night, number 4 gun fired 84 rounds over open sight, running out of the limited Splintex rounds and having to go back to HE or high explosive. The fighting was intense and the gunners managed to recapture number 6 gun. Close air support was called in and quickly American Cobra gunships, fighters and the iconic Douglas AC-47 Spooky gunship armed with 3 deadly miniguns began to rain down fire on the NVA positions and make overhead runs. After 2.5 hours of heavy fighting and the assault finally broken under intensive bombardment, the NVA withdrew just before first light. 9 Australians were killed and another 28 wounded during this brutal battle. The mortar line bore the brunt of casualties, with 5 dead and 8 wounded out of 18 men. Over 50 dead bodies were counted belonging to the enemy, with many more being dragged away. The last action occurred in the morning, with Delta Company launching a spirited company-sized attack with fixed bayonets on some remaining enemy who were located between them and Coral. In the wake of the battle, on that day on the 13th of May, Coral was immediately reinforced by elements of 3 RAR and a US artillery battery. Once it was clear there was no longer an immediate threat to Coral, 3 RAR's main force and the Kiwi 161 artillery battery then moved out to establish FSPB Coogee inside AO Manly. The battle rhythm of operations would be that bases would be heavily defended by night, while battalions of infantry would conduct patrols by day. This would deny freedom of movement to enemy ground forces in the area, as well as attempt to uncover any further enemy positions. The next day, on the 14th of May, the Aussies continued to send out patrols, some with APCs, armoured personnel carriers. An Aussie digger, Richard Norden, who was part of B Company 1 RAR at the time and a private, would go on to earn a Victoria Cross in an act of selfless heroism. His citation reads, "During Operation Tong Tang, 5th Platoon B Company were ambushed and came under heavy fire from an estimated squad of 7 to 10 North Vietnamese Army regular soldiers. Private Norden, a member of the leading section, ran forward under heavy enemy fire to the section commander and forward scout, who were wounded during the initial contact. Private Norden killed 1 North Vietnamese Army soldier whilst moving forward, and having expended his ammunition, recovered that enemy's automatic weapon which he used against further North Vietnamese Army soldiers. He then half-carried, half-dragged the severely wounded section commander back to the section. Private Norden, seriously wounded, again advanced to the forward scout. He pressed forward under enemy fire and reached the scout, killing the North Vietnamese Army soldier who had been using the scout as a shield. Having determined that the scout was dead, Private Norden returned to the section to collect grenades and moved forward for a 3rd time. He cleared the area to enable the body of the scout to be recovered. Private Norden showed a complete disregard for his own personal safety, and his courage and selfless acts resulted in the enemy position being secured and likely saved the lives of other members of his platoon. At the time, Norden was awarded a Distinguished Conduct Medal, which was only upgraded to a Victoria Cross in November 2024. Sadly, the award was posthumously awarded. Tragically, Norden died during active duty in 1972 with the Australian police when he left the army. After licking their wounds for a couple of days and regrouping, the North Vietnamese attacked FSPB Coral yet again on the night of the 15th-16th of May. Now more prepared and with a reinforced American artillery battery, a stout defence by the defenders once again beat back the enemy. However, 5 more men were killed, along with another 19 wounded. Although this was the last ground assault on Coral, the enemy continued to mortar the position on a regular basis. The senior leadership then decided, with all the pressure put on Coral, to reinforce the position with Australian Centurion tanks. They arrived on the 23rd of May, after a hectic 120-kilometre road move from their base at Phuoc Toi. The next day, 3 RAR, a troop of tanks, and 161 battery were ordered to establish another FSPB, known as Balmoral, in AO Newport, about 4 kilometres north of Coral. During the deployment, a number of enemy bunkers were uncovered. Perhaps due to this discovery, the NVA reacted violently to the Australian move, and on the 26th of May at 03:45 hours, a preliminary bombardment preceded a battalion-sized assault on Balmoral. Mortars and RPGs were used against Coral in an attempt to suppress supporting fire, but the attempt failed. The attack was repulsed with massive artillery and air support. Centurion tanks used anti-personnel canister rounds against the attackers. In a separate operation, enemy bunkers were then tackled by the infantry and tanks and successfully cleared. Previously, some senior army leaders have been sceptical about the utility of operating Centurion tanks in the jungle. This action, however, proved the value of armour. Another final assault was launched on Balmoral by the North Vietnamese on the 28th of May, which was again defeated. During this entire time, the Australians followed their doctrine of aggressive patrolling to dominate the area and show to the NVA that they weren't intimidated. Another large engagement occurred on the 30th of May when C Company 1 RAR uncovered a series of enemy bunkers in a wooded area south of Coral. After a bruising but deemed successful 26-day operation, the Australians vacated AO Surfers and returned to their normal area of operations by the coastline. Throughout the 26 days of the battle, a total force comprising of up to 3,000 Australians prevailed against a well-prepared and numerically superior enemy. The Australians, for the first time, faced regular People's Army of Vietnam North Vietnamese Army formations, operating in battalion and regimental strength, rather than VC guerrillas. Not only were they able to stand their ground in the face of overwhelming numbers against a highly capable and motivated enemy, they showed with grit and determination that they could also defeat them. Strictly speaking, the engagement at Coral and Balmoral were two separate battles. However, the sheer amount of contacts and intense operational tempo displayed by both sides over the near 4-week period earned it being labelled the Battle of Coral Balmoral. For the Allied forces, the battle led to a total of 26 dead, 25 Australians and 1 American. 99 Australians were wounded, along with 10 more New Zealanders and Americans. Both the Kiwis and the Yanks provided critical support to their Aussie oppos during this battle, and it can't be understated. Indeed, without the high degree of professionalism shown by the American Air Force, the position could have been overrun. The butcher's toll included 5% of the entire Anzac losses during the Vietnam War. Hundreds of North Vietnamese and Viet Cong were also killed and wounded. Estimates were at least around 250 killed, likely far more. We often think of the North Vietnamese or Viet Cong as almost robotic, fanatical automatons, but it's important to remember that these fighters were humans, just like the Aussies, Kiwis and Yanks on the other side, as well as their fellow countrymen in the south. Some were ardent communists, but many felt they were not fighting for an ideology, but in their eyes were fighting for Vietnam. Many just were teenagers, with basic equipment, families that wanted them home, and like many of the opponents, conscripted. I can't imagine the ferocity of this battle, let alone being conscripted into this. The fact that the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong were such fearsome opponents, willing to come on and in the face of overwhelming firepower again and again during the course of the Vietnam War, is a testament to their courage and determination. With one side viewing the other as imperial mercenaries invading their country, and the other seeing their opposition as fanatical communists about to take over Southeast Asia and maybe the world, it's important to realise that the young lads from both sides likely weren't interested in world ideologies or power plays on the globe. For them, they would have just liked to have been getting on with their lives, whether studying, working on the farm, or surfing on Bondi Beach. They were just victims of circumstance. While Radio Hanoi announced a major PAVN victory, there was little doubt that the Australians had convincingly repulsed multiple attacks, dominated the ground, and denied freedom of movement to enemy forces during their deployment. For the Australian leadership, the battle highlighted the need for improved operational planning, clearer command and control processes, and more effective use of intelligence to aid decision-making. If it weren't for the courage of the hard-fighting troops on the ground, coupled with the air support, Coral Balmoral could have been a catastrophe. Here is a snapshot of some of the medal awards issued to the men following the battle. Gallantry awards Some issued years or decades after include the Victoria Cross, Military Cross, Medal of Gallantry, Military Medal, and Distinguished Conduct Medal. Other medals include Vietnam Medal, Australian Defence Medal, Australian Active Service Medal 45 to 75, and foreign awards, Vietnam Campaign Medal, Vietnam Gallantry Cross. There may be other medals I've missed, as there were hundreds of men involved. It's difficult to keep track, so I do apologise if I've missed any. This battle also earned the ATF a Unit Citation for Gallantry. On the 50th anniversary of the battle in 2018, the courageous service displayed by the members of the units involved was recognised by the Australian government. The insignia of a Unit Citation for Gallantry is a gilt rectangular frame surrounding a deep green ribbon. The frame has a design of flames emanating from the outer edges of the flame to the centre. Personnel who were members of the unit when an award was made wear a Federation star in the centre of the ribbon and continue to wear the insignia after leaving the unit. Personnel who are subsequently posted to the unit wear the insignia without the Federation star and only while actually posted to the unit. I believe you can actually see a 105mm M2A2 howitzer used by the 102nd Field Artillery, 12th Field Regiment during the Battle of Coral, which is now located at the Australia War Memorial in Canberra. Its presence at the memorial served as a powerful reminder of the bravery and sacrifices made during this battle and the wider war. So I used a variety of sources for this video, as you can imagine. I'll read out a few to you now. The source I found most useful and detailed was The Real Story of the First Battle of Coral by Colonel Ian F. Ahern, and I believe he's a veteran of this battle. This was posted on ArtilleryHistorydotOrg website, which is really useful. There's lots of other information on there as well, not just of this battle. The Australian War Memorial website was really useful as well, and the Army Museum of Western Australia had a very good videography, I think the word is, of this battle, so really useful. There are veterans' accounts of this battle on YouTube as well, which understandably are fascinating and also very vivid, so definitely worth checking out. It's really hard to do justice to this battle, which was on such a scale over so many weeks in the space of a short YouTube video. And I'm just a middle-aged man, a pom at that, in a man cave, trying my best. So if you want to find out more details of this battle, I definitely recommend doing some more research. But I hope you found some value from this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.